Hey everyone, this is Parsha Toldot, Malachi chapter 1, verse 1, all the way through chapter 2, verse 7. So, yeah, we're in the book of Malachi now. The tie-in to the Torah portion is this contrast of God choosing Jacob as a son of promise over Esau, and that's mentioned in the second verse of this Haftarah. So let me first just briefly talk about that phrase that shows up here about how God loved Jacob, but he hates Esau. Well, we know that God actually blesses Esau greatly, and he actually protects Esau's descendants by telling the Israelites not to attack his descendants. And this is in Deuteronomy 2, right? Now, we know that God doesn't bless what he hates. So, and hates in that modern English meaning of the word. So we know that that's not what is meant here. I don't know that it would be specifically considered an idiom to hate somebody Hebraically, but it's more like a difference in the quality of love. So Esau, because of his rebellion and his total disregard for the things of God, that caused God's love to, it caused God to not envelop Esau with his goodness in the same way that he did with Jacob. Now, there's a whole lot more that can be said here about that phrase, God loved Jacob but hated Esau. But that's not really what I wanted to focus on in this Haftarah. There's something specific in the text of Malachi that I really feel like is what I want to focus on instead, and I think that needs to be given our full attention. So first, let me tell you a little something about the setting of this book. A very little something, because we don't actually know for sure when this took place specifically. But we know that it was about 100 years after the exiles returned to Babylon. And we don't really know much about Malachi himself. Like, none of the personal details that you would think maybe you should have about a prophet, we don't have any of those. Nothing really outside the fact that he was a prophet who gave some powerful messages. So Malachi speaks to people living in Jerusalem after they've been there for quite some time and long after the temple has been rebuilt. So the people knew, they knew about the promises of a future restoration of all things. They knew about the messianic era of peace and life in God's abundance. They knew that obviously the temple was rebuilt and they had been, they're back in the land, right? But the reality for them at the time was not really what they were hoping for. Things were not really like that messianic era of peace at this time. And so I wonder if you have ever been in a situation where you've been told great promises for a good future, and you hold on to those promises, believing that the good days are just around the corner, right? And you wait, and you have high expectations that life's going to get better. You're going to get that job or that raise that you've been promised. Your wayward adult child is this time going to stay sober. Your husband this time is going to surrender to the sovereignty of God. But then things don't go that way. And disillusionment can set in. And that's what's happening in the lives of the people that Malachi has been sent to minister to. What they're seeing daily is poverty and injustice. Those are the result of a people who have kind of corrupted themselves and a leadership that had corrupted itself. Now, the book of Malachi is short. It's just 4 chapters long, and it's set up with a series of disputes between God and his people. And what's interesting is that God kind of takes on the role of himself in making a statement, and then he answers or disputes it as if he's speaking for his collective children. Really interesting. So 6 times God makes a claim or an accusation, and then 6 times the people dispute him. And in each case, God gets the rightful last word. So this Haftarah covers 2 of those 6 disputes, but I want to cover one. The first dispute comes from Malachi 1 verse 2, where God says, I have loved you. Now, the first indication that things are going really wrong is that this statement from God gets challenged by the people. They ask, when did you love me, God? Now, as I said before, the fact that they've returned from the Babylonian captivity and the temple has been rebuilt and they're able to worship God the way that their ancestors had for all time, those things in and of themselves should have been an indicator that God loved them. But to the skeptic, those things could also be viewed as evidence that God loved Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not them. So by asking, when did you love me? They show that they're actually very unsteady in faith that he has love for them personally, this generation. What have you done for me? And I wonder if you've ever felt like that. That God needed to prove himself over and over and over to you. That it's one thing to see evidence of his love in the patriarchs and the matriarchs throughout biblical history. But what about me? Do you love me that way? It turns out I felt like that. And it took me completely by surprise that I would think that. In fact, the very morning before I started working on this very Haftarah, came a very pivotal point where I actually questioned whether God really did want to rescue me, save me, heal me. Not in a general sense. I questioned whether he would do that for me if I made a wrong choice about a decision that I've needed to make that has paralyzed me for months, and I've not been able to make it. Now, I knew that God could do those things, could rescue me, save me, heal me. My faith is okay in that area. I'm a very black and white thinker, and that actually comes in handy in some cases. I know that he can do that. I know he has the power. But it was, will he do that for me if I make a wrong decision? That's what tripped me up. Will he protect me only when I trust him? What about the times when my fear is stronger than my faith? Will he protect me from my own incorrect choices? I was beginning to wonder, when is it that I would move into that category of Esau, who despised his birthright? And God loved Jacob but hated Esau. When does lack of faith and letting fear of something turn into outright rebellion? Now, I'd been avoiding making a pretty serious decision for months because I hadn't clearly heard from him what he wanted me to do. And I kept praying, God, just tell me what to do and I will do it. Now, this thing that I've been praying over, this decision that I needed to make, it's not an area that's specifically covered in Torah. So I didn't have a precedent to base my decision, and God wasn't speaking to me clearly. But that morning, as I was asking him once again, please just tell me what to do, I also asked him to kind of unwind the sort of complicated web of fear that had been surrounding me, that was holding me back from being able to move on this issue. I have loved you, he said. And I answered like the Jews in Malachi, when did you love me? And I realized at that moment that I wasn't sure that he would love me and protect me if I didn't make a good choice. I had realized in this decision-making process that I'm never going to have enough facts for me to make a fully informed decision, which is something that was important to me, to be able to make a fully informed decision if God's not going to just say, do this or do this. So I knew I had to trust him, but I had to trust him in a way that I don't think I have before. I had to make a move. I had to make a decision. I had to say, based on what I know, this is what I choose. And I had to trust God. That day, I had to act on faith that he does love me enough. I had to choose to stop being paralyzed by fear of making the wrong decision and having him reject me. And that was the tangled web of fear. That was it. I was afraid that he would reject me for choosing wrong. And in this particular situation, there may not even have been a right or a wrong. You know, what good father rejects their child when that child stumbles? What good father? Now, there's plenty of examples of earthly father or mother or a loved one in your life rejecting you because of a poor decision. I myself have been both on the receiving end and the giving end of that. But do earthly examples accurately reflect God? Of course not. Prove to me, God, that you really care. That was that first dispute in Malachi. That's what it was all about. God says, I love you. Every action of his throughout time says, I love you. So what more does it take to believe? I mean, the proof of his love, it's in every sunrise and every sunset. It's in that one first gasp of air of the newborn. It's in the smell of life-giving rain and that bow in the sky. And God's proof that he loves you is that prodigal that returns and says, I am sorry. Can I start again? And they're received with open arms. So the people that Malachi served, they're not any different from me or you. They became blinded to God's love that was so obvious if they had only asked for eyes to see. Their hearts had grown cold, and they didn't see God's love to them specifically because they refused to see. They refused to ask him to help them see. And I don't want to be like that, and I know you don't either. That morning, not so many days ago, I had to stretch my definition of God's love from what I thought that it meant. I thought it was conditional in some cases. I thought it was based on how well I trust him and that my decisions that I make to the best of my ability demonstrated that trust. Aleph, Hey, Bet, or Vet, Hey. That's ahava. That's the Hebrew word for love. God says, I loved you, but you don't believe me. Now, the word picture of love, there's a combination of the aleph and the bet, which means Av, Father. And then twice in there, there's a hey, which means the letter hey, which means to reveal or to behold. So in Hebrew, God and love are synonyms. They're inseparable. God is love, and love is the Father revealed. So it's not possible that God should stop loving. When, not if, I make a bad choice based on little faith and much fear, God doesn't stop loving me and rescuing me and saving me and healing me. It doesn't make me Esau. God doesn't withdraw his protection when I act like a toddler taking her first steps, stumbling and falling. Yeah, it was hard to admit that after all these years serving the Lord, I'm still like a toddler in my faith in some areas. Like I'm steady on my feet some of the time, but not always. I wasn't in this area. When God said, I have loved you, he means it according to his character, not according to earthly examples that we have or that we are. With his love, we can learn to take bigger and more steady steps of our faith. And we'll stumble, but that's not us being Esau. And the sooner that we accept that, the sooner that I accept that and live like we truly believe this, the better off we'll be, right? Amen? So this week, look around. Ask God to open up your eyes to see evidence in your life that not only does God love Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the patriarchs, the matriarchs, but he loves you. So I'll see you next week in the Haftarah called Vayeshev.